Welcome to African News Roundup. Starting off this segment, Madagascar has entered a new phase of political turmoil after Colonel Michael Randrarina, leader of an elite military unit, announced that the armed forces have taken control of the country. Colonel Michael said the military was launching a national reform mechanism aimed at restoring democracy and rebuilding public trust. He declared that existing government structures under the 2010 constitution were being dissolved, though the National Assembly would continue to function. Michael also outlined a transitional government framework featuring a joint presidency, a working cabinet, and judicial reforms led by Supreme Constitutional Court. The move comes after weeks of mass anti-government protests led by many young demonstrators calling for reform and accountability. Now, here is my analysis. Although the crisis gives the need for strong democratic institutions, transparent governance, and dialogue between leaders and citizens to prevent recurring power struggles, however, it also raises high concerns about the legitimacy of military rule and the potential mix of democracy. Now, the president's flight and the alignment of the Capsat unit with protesters shows that public and military confidence in the government has finally collapsed. Nevertheless, Madagascar faces an uncertain form of political stability as the country transitions under military control amid promises of reform, but faces fears of authoritarianism and if the military government will bring stability to the country. The people should eventually support them. Now, moving on to another news on African News Roundup, the lecturers at public universities in Nigeria have started a 2-week strike to protest poor pay and inadequate funding. The Nigerian government has appealed to ASU, led by Professor Chris Pewuna, to reconsider the strike, emphasizing dialogue as the best path to resolution. They also want that under the no work, no pay labor policy, lecturers who refuse to work would not receive their salaries. ASU's history of disputes with the government dates back to the 1980s, with unfulfilled agreements signed in 1992, 2009, and 2013. Now, the 2022 strike, which lasted for 8 months, was only ended by a court order after paralyzing academic activities nationwide. Here is my analysis on this issue. Even though the recurring strikes reflect deep-rooted problems in Nigeria's higher education system, including chronic underfunding, politicized administration, and a lack of trust between the government and the union, which has caused repeated disruptions and continue to affect students and academic process, making education a delayed result for the students. Finally, lasting solutions will require genuine dialogue, transparent funding, and consistent commitment from both the government and ASU to rebuild Nigeria's university system. Now, moving on to the final news on African News Roundup, a group of 14 West Africans have been deported from the United States to Ghana under a bilateral agreement, bringing the total number of deportees accepted by Ghana to 42. The government spokesperson, Felix Kwakye Ofosu, confirmed that the Attorney General would defend the arrangement in court. The deportations are part of a wider U.S. immigration crackdown under President Donald Trump, focusing on migrants with criminal records or unclear deportation destination. Now, since July, the U.S. has deported Africans to several countries, including Ghana, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Eswatini, through mostly secretive third country agreements. Human rights groups have criticized the program for its lack of transparency and potential human rights abuses. An earlier group of deportees sent to Ghana faced detention in poor conditions near Accra, with some later deported to Togo, despite only 2 being Togolese. Now, here is what I think about this news. Now, this reflects the tension between the national security and humanitarian responsibility, as well as the ethical implications of sending people to countries where their safety and legal rights are uncertain. So the human rights group should have condemned the deportations for being secretive and inhumane, citing poor detention conditions and wrongful deportation. This incident has just raised questions about transparency, international cooperation, and migrant human rights, as some individuals were reportedly sent to countries that they do not even belong to, and this should be duly addressed, especially for human rights' sake. All this news were gotten from a research from African News and BBC Africa. Well, that's all I have for you on African News Roundup. Until next time, do not forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.